Ever since Hugh Edwards, there's been a massive list of them. The judge who just let Labour MPs who had had Category A photos. I lived in LA where there was a casting couch and the women were willing participants. In the Harvey Weinstein case, he was giving her money every month. And then she's like, oh, me too. The ones that came worse off are the women that always said no. You never heard the Me Too women coming out speaking for the victims of the grooming gangs.
And now sort of celebrating the OnlyFans girls. There's the phenomenon of Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue in particular.
I don't need a wheelchair, like I am.
Repulsive.
There we go.
Things are very different now. People being followed or people being harassed. Girls get on the beach now. They won't give you a description of who did it.
So sorry.
Oh, why can't you go back? Because my nephew doesn't like chicken nuggets.
That's not one of them.
Yes,
that's not.
That was literally one of them. His son didn't like the foreign chicken nuggets.
It's not a silver bullet.
We've got to fund this somehow, haven't we?
Leilani Dowding, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really flattered. As I said to you, I'm like, why does he want me?
Well, a pleasure to have you on, though. And you're on loads of big media channels. People are really interested in what you have to say. And you have a unique position as having been part, beauty, model-y, pageant-y person and Page 3 star, which we can explain what that is for non-British audience later. And you have really important views that I think are echoed in the views of most people. And you're not afraid to say them, which is very rare. And I think we can start with, obviously your history being in sort of the modelling industry and things like that. How in the last few years has, I suppose we can start not with trans, but with maybe mass immigration. Yeah. How have things changed for women and women's rights?
Well, if we go right back to the start of it, in 98, I became Miss Great Britain. And that was a huge opportunity for me. I was at university at the time. I ended up going to Miss Universe, which coincided with my end of year exams. And so I thought I'll take a year out and I'll go back to it, which I ended up not doing because I was having such a great time. But when I won that, it opened the world for me. I was able to get a visa to go to America. I got TV work. I got into modelling. The world just opened up. And then now you can see there's beauty pageants that are men, that are biological men who have changed, everything about the way they look with surgery, but are still men competing against women and taking and stealing the prize money. If you're in a country where there's big prize money, taking the prize money, taking the scholarships and taking away the opportunities, that I had when I did that. So I think, the trans issue's been quite big, but I never expected any of these to be kind of issues I would ever end up talking about or being asked to talk about. Then I just went from modelling, I moved out to America, I lived there for 17 years. I finally moved back again 6 years ago. It wasn't supposed to be a full move, but because of the lockdowns and stuff, I ended up properly moving back. And I don't know, because I am in a position where I don't have a boss. I don't have anyone, to kind of cancel me. I can say how I feel about things. And I was very vocal, obviously, about lockdowns and vaccine mandates. And that got me into trouble with the press. And I think, that's kind of where a lot of people ended up finding me again, 4, 5, 6 years ago.
How does it feel for you? Is it different for women in general walking down the street in the UK? Do you feel eyes on you? I'm thinking of the mass immigration issue.
It's definitely changed. I think, when I used to walk down the street, well, I first of all, I cover up a lot more than I used to. I'm a lot older now. This was 98. This was, 26 years ago. It was a long time ago. So things were so different. I was living in London. I was modelling. I was living in London. I would take a night bus home after a club. I would not be afraid walking out in the evenings. I'd be out with my friends in little hot pants, and I would dress how I wanted to dress, and I felt safe. I didn't feel like, I was going to get pulled and attacked by somebody. Just things are very different now, and the way there used to be banter. Like, I would joke around, like I'd walk past a building site and if I didn't get a wolf whistle, I'd probably walk back past again. I'd be like, oh, what's wrong with me today? But I wouldn't joke about that now because it's not the same kind of banter. It's almost creepy. It's people being followed or people being harassed. And it's a very different kind of banter to the way it was like 25 years ago. It's just, that's not the same. And it's probably because, it's not British people doing it, having a joke about. And it's, look, take Bournemouth. Bournemouth's my hometown. I was 16 years old. I would hang out on the beach. Girls get on the beach now. It's just a fact. They go into the water, 15, 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old girls are in the water, they'll get molested by people. And they won't give you a description of who did it, which is, pretty much the description itself. I would go to the beach. Women would be topless on the beach. At that point, I wasn't actually topless on the beach, but women would be topless on the beach. I'd walk through Bournemouth Gardens in the dark, back into the town centre, and I'd call my parents to come and pick me up. And I would feel safe, and I would be safe doing it. Now people are getting stabbed everywhere. You've got a hotel called the Roundhouse that's full of illegals or asylum seekers.
Is that one of those hotels that the government has paid to do that?
Yes, yeah, called the Roundhouse. And you've got that, and you don't want to walk past, you'd never want to walk past there in the night. It's not safe being anywhere. Just last weekend, two men got stabbed about 7:30 p.m. We know that down on the beach, 2 women got stabbed, 1 died just before Christmas. It's kind of all been forgotten about. So
why do you think the government, you mentioned that they don't say who, other countries do. Denmark does, for example. They collect data on different ethnicities and crime, and it shows that immigrants or new immigrants from Middle Eastern countries, for example, are way overrepresented in committing these crimes. Why do you think the UK won't cover crimes that way?
They don't want us seeing the stats, do they? They know that because then you can't, when you start calling out actual facts, you can't be called racist because you're calling out the facts. So it's just better not to have the facts. So when we use our own observations and use our own reality and our own experiences, then someone else can say, well, that's not true, that you're just being racist. But if they have all the numbers and they have all the facts, then you can't say that. It's like if you look per capita at who's taking the most benefits. It's not the British people that are on the most benefits, it's migrants. And I'll say again, I lived in Los Angeles and I'd moved to America. When I had my visa, I had to be working to be able to retain that visa. And if I couldn't work or I was no longer sponsored by my model agency, because you have a sponsor who sponsors your visa and you have to work for them and you can only work for them. If I wasn't working for them, I'd have to leave the country. I couldn't go and work for Uber Eats. I couldn't go and work for, anything else. I'd have to work for my model agency. And there was one time when I think I'd come back to England to do a TV show. And I was away for a few months. And I went back to America and my visa had been revoked. I didn't even know. I was like, oh, they'd pulled me aside and they questioned me and they're like, sorry, your visa's been revoked. And that's because I hadn't been going on my casting. So, I did have a return ticket back. I was only there that particular time for 2 weeks. So they let me in and they said, next time if you come in, you're going to have to get another visa or you're just not going to be allowed back. So I had to get another visa. I had to get another agent. But it's like, you come here and even, if you stop working, then you just go and claim benefits. It's insane. And then when I got my green card, again, it was like you couldn't claim benefits ever. I had to have all these tests. I had to have a HIV test. I had to have a TB test because I'd had a TB vaccine. I had to then have a chest X-ray because I showed TB antibodies. So all of this happened when I got my green card. And it's like, why does none of this happen in the UK? Why is it that these people can just come across? You've got the illegals coming across, then you've got the students coming across and bringing their entire families. Then you've got people that come over here and aren't working and then start claiming benefits off the taxpayers' money. So, it's just a completely and utterly messed up system.
I'm pleased you mentioned the other way round when you went to America and you understood their system and you understood you had to play by their rules. And it's really, really hard. I think that's what people forget. If an English person or someone from anywhere wants to pop off and go and live in America, Australia, most of these countries, it's not easy. And we've always understood that. And we have to play by their rules.
Yeah.
I mean, people have said to me when I've said this about mass immigration, how would you have felt when you were living in Argentina if somebody had come and said, you've got to leave? And I said, I would be gutted because I had my life there, but I would have understood that them's the rules.
Yeah.
If my visa wasn't right at any point, that's the rules of the country.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I don't know, we've inverted that when it comes to immigrants. I suppose there's the aspect of they're all victims kind of thing. So we're bringing in refugees. But when they're coming from France, I don't understand,
Albania, where's the war in Albania? You say that, but then it's like, oh, I'm a refugee because I'm somebody and the people in my village are going to kill me, and that's why why can't you go back? Because my nephew doesn't like chicken nuggets in Albania.
That's not one of them.
Yes,
that's not.
That was literally one of them. His son, or I think it was his son, not his nephew. His son didn't like the foreign chicken nuggets. That was actually something as to why.
I'm going to look into that.
Yeah, I promise you.
I'm going to fact check this.
It
might have been a satire.
Yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between parody and reality anymore. But this was a real thing. It was like, didn't like the chicken nuggets. But you see it a lot when these criminals do something heinous and then they're like, well, we can't go back to our country because, our village is not going to accept us because we've done something so awful.
Yeah.
Well, why are we accepting it here?
There was the guy who had, I don't want to say the word too often on YouTube, but I suppose molested his own son, was it? And he couldn't go back because of that. That was mad. Get that guy out the country, out of the country. That's ridiculous. It's a concern, isn't it? And because people are not being encouraged to adapt to our values, and that's why we're seeing these issues with women. Did you see that Ross Kemp thing? I've mentioned it a couple of times before, but Ross Kemp, he went to somewhere.
It was somewhere in Africa, and he was asking the men about, right? Is that it?
Yeah.
And their concern was like, oh, I might get the woman pregnant, or it would bring shame if we got the woman pregnant. There was no concern for the woman. Is that the one?
Yeah, they couldn't even, because Ross was saying, you shouldn't be doing this to women. And they were like, well, I suppose you're right. I suppose you're right because I might get them pregnant or I might get a disease. And it was like, no, you shouldn't be doing it to women because it's bad for them. And it was just a foreign idea for them.
It just went over their head. Like, they just couldn't understand. They're like, as you said, just that blank look of like, yes, the diseases or getting her pregnant, that would be bad. It was just, crazy.
It's mad. And that's what people they do not understand. I think the left, they really don't understand. They don't want, it's almost like they're not brave enough to be able to face up to what humanity can be like in certain cultures. And you mentioned the Roundhouse, was it? The name of the, and this is happening throughout the UK. And I think a lot of people are actually, we haven't covered it much on this show, and a lot of people are not fully aware of what's actually going on. What is happening to many hotels around the country?
So, the government are basically calling up the owners of the hotels, and sometimes if they're kind of a crappy chain, they might allow it. Or if it's even if it's a nice hotel or a listed beautiful home, they may agree if they've got some cash flow problems, and the government will call them up and say, can we rent all your rooms and we'll take them all. And what we'll do is, we'll just give you this fee and you can fire all your staff because we'll staff them ourselves. And, so all your staff that have been around and your chefs and your cleaners and everything else, don't worry, you don't have to pay them. And it actually happened to a friend of mine, John Mappin, down at his hotel, Camelot Castle it was called. And they called him up and he actually asked them, he said, so what happens if they damage it? Oh, don't worry about the damages. We'll pay for it. That's the taxpayers. So the taxpayers are paying it. Don't worry, we'll pay for it. And then he said, well, what about all the revenue that all the restaurants and everything catering to tourists usually make from people staying in my hotel? And obviously they've got no answer for that. So that's what they're doing. They're taking, some of them are the most beautiful hotels.
His is it 4-star, 5-star?
4-star hotel, I think. Yeah, beautiful hotel. But they're also doing it with landlords. This is the thing. And then they'll say, oh, we're cutting down on the migrant hotels, but they're not cutting down on the number of migrants. What they're doing is, if you look at Serco.
What's Serco?
So funny enough, Serco kind of deal with the border control, but they also get money from the government and house immigrants. So if you go onto Serco's website, you'll see in the Midlands, we're looking for landlords. And what we'll do is we'll give you a 5-year contract, no breaks. We'll pay for all maintenance. We'll pay, you'll have no estate agent fees. We'll pay for all repairs, all the maintenance, and we'll put asylum seekers in your house. So, and sometimes it's above market rent. So, the government, and this happened under the Conservatives as well.
Yeah.
The fake Conservative Tories.
Well,
this
just
happened,
lefties.
Yeah, this happened under them as well. So it's not just a Labour thing. The Tories probably started under the Tories, but Labour are saying, we're going to cut down on the migrant hotels. But now they're going and even in new housing estates, there's landlords that will buy up the housing stock. Then they'll just put them out into contracts with Serco, and then Serco can just fill them up with asylum seekers, which obviously is going to affect the market for British citizens, the rental market for British citizens, and also legal immigrants who are here, who are working, who need a place to rent, because, the inventory is taken up by people renting it out to Serco. That's happening all across the Midlands and up north.
You did economics, right? So
yes.
You know your bit about the economy. What is this doing to our economy? Of course, you mentioned, I think it was something you shared actually, it was like 40 the 40 nationalities who are receiving more benefits in the UK than British people. What is that doing to our economy?
Well, the thing is we've got to fund this somehow, haven't we? They're raising taxes all over the place. They're raising council taxes. They're merging councils together. Like, for example, Stoke Council. They want to merge Stoke Council, which is massively in debt, with my council, which is Staffordshire Moorlands. So that's going to mean that the people of Staffordshire Moorlands, whose council's pretty well run, we can balance the books. Everything's pretty much taken care of. We now have to contribute to Stoke. So all of these kinds of things are happening on a local level. They're raising, the inheritance tax for the farmers. I mean, that's just horrific. And I can go into that later. And I'm surrounded by farmers. You've never seen such hardworking people in your life that, really help keep a community together. And what people don't understand is if you went to, what's it called? What's that program where is it Shark Tank?
Dragon's Den.
Sorry, Shark Tank in America, Dragon's Den. So if you go to Dragon's Den and say, look, I want to invest 5 million on a farm and your return's going to be like 0.5%. They're going to be like, no, like we don't, that's not even minimum wage. You want us to invest all this money and you're not going to get, we're not even going to get minimum wage back. That's how it is for the farmers. So they have the land. And then they're not making that much money from it. Then they hope that they can pass it on to their children to carry on the family business. And this also goes for small businesses, small family-run businesses. But they've got their farm. They can't sell the house because, that's where they live. They can't sell the machinery because they need the machinery to work the land. So then they've got to sell the land. But if you sell the land, how do you have the animals on it? How do you have the crops growing? So it becomes non-workable once they have to sell the land. And so, it's ruining farming. They're taking the money from the farmers. They're increasing all our tax with the green. It's a whole mess. Sorry,
no, you're absolutely right.
And didn't explain that very well.
No, I think you did though, and I think what greater example of the mess that we're in than these hardworking people. And not all farmers are, of course, British or English in the way you might imagine them, but they're hardworking people working on the soil day after day, and their money is being used to subsidise people who come here and are not working.
Yeah, sorry. Can I start that again? I'm really bad.
I thought you were good.
There's so much, because it's just so huge. It's so hard to say it in like a small amount. We're basically just having to subsidize all these people that aren't British people. We're having to subsidize the people that have come here illegally over the channel. We're having to subsidize the people that have maybe come here to work and have decided they don't want to work. Mm-hmm. We've just come here for the economic migrants. They've come here. We're subsidizing the economic migrants. We're subsidizing the students and their families who they've brought over, and we're just taking all of the money from the most hardworking British people. So you just have hardworking British people waking up every morning thinking, I'm going to work. I'm having my money stolen every single which way. I'm having it stolen through my council tax raises. I'm having it stolen through my income tax, the VAT I pay on everything. I can't grow my business and employ people because then I suddenly jump up to the VAT bracket that's never moved with inflation, and now I'm earning over 90 grand. So now I have to, charge an extra 20%, which just goes to the government, doesn't go to me. So you've got these hardworking people just being stolen from at every moment by the government. Then their kids aren't safe at school. Then their girlfriends and wives aren't safe walking the streets. Mm-hmm. You don't know if your kid's going to get stabbed at school or get picked up by county lines and trying to manipulate them into selling drugs. And all of this is happening to these people. And these British people just want to, be able to work, have a safe, bring their families up safely. And it can't happen because we're just throwing away money. Wars here, there, everywhere. We're throwing away money on the illegals. We're throwing away money on the benefit scroungers that can't even speak English. We're throwing money away on interpreters for the benefit offices. We're throwing away money on interpreters for the NHS. We're just throwing away money.
DEI officers as well.
DEI officers.
That one kills me. Because then for them to be able to continue earning, they have to keep finding racism and inequality where it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Drives me mad.
And then you have America and you look there and it's like scrapping it all. They've got DOGE, Dodge, and they're looking for all the, corrupt and fraudulent ways the government has been spending money, all the ways they've been back-channeling it to NGOs. They're like deporting people. They're getting rid of the DEI nonsense. They're stopping, biological men in women's sports. And it's like, why can't we just have that here?
Yeah.
Why can't just a bit of it?
When they do, if that does happen in 4 years' time, can you imagine what they'll... I mean, Keir Starmer won't be able to keep going to those boxes in Arsenal matches anymore. I mean, that's the first thing the taxpayer... he's getting freebies from people, isn't he? That drives me mad. A few years ago, there was the MeToo movement, and we could talk about the positives and negatives. I think they were both of that. But in the time since then, our society has seem to both make women incredibly unsafe in their own bathrooms and sports teams, and introduce more and more people telling them they don't have to adapt, who have views that class women as second-rate citizens. So what the hell is happening to women? What is this concerted effort against women?
Well, this is the weirdest thing. It's like you had MeToo, which I was always quite skeptical about it because it just seemed like a load of women talking about like really historical things that were not particularly horrific. They might have had like some silly comment or something, but then we're not looking after the women who are getting attacked or the kids that are getting attacked, or, it's like there's a every single day in the newspapers and we're not doing anything about that. Or the same people that, were about Me Too and all women's rights and all of this, they're not doing anything about the biological men in women's sports. In this country, because in America they seem to be sorting themselves out, but in this country it's like they're not doing anything about it. And all the Me Too movement seemed to do, I'm just trying to think of how to say this without, because it's going to offend people, but
just offend people.
I think I'm trying to think of how to say it. I lived in LA where it started, and I saw what happened. There was a casting couch, and the women were willing participants of that casting couch. There were many women in Los Angeles who would throw themselves at men in order to further their careers,
Get roles.
get roles.
Did you see this happening? Did you have
I could
friends of
see
yours?
it. Not friends of mine, but you'd see it. You go out in LA and there's always like some young girl in her 20s with like some old man schmoozing up to him. And it was a two-way thing. It wasn't like, when you looked at one of the women, like for example, in the Harvey Weinstein case, he was giving her money every month. So I can't remember which one it was. I probably shouldn't name her anyway, but she was getting money monthly from Harvey Weinstein. And then she's like, oh, me too. He me. But hold on, you were going back to him every month. You were getting paid from him. I think the Italian papers like called her out on what they thought it kind of was. She was offended. But this is, it was what I was seeing it a lot. You would see women going after married men. It was like a two-way thing. It wasn't like they were all victims. And LA, I think a lot of things start in like Hollywood, California, spread out to America, dribbles over to England. And, Me Too was definitely one of those things, but it was by a lot of women who were using themselves to get themselves into a better position.
That's really interesting. And because it's so complicated, I suppose people on the other side of that argument would say, but that the fact that the situation was set up in a way that it's that way around in itself is, that there are these men who seem to be in power, that there are these women, but maybe that's a result of biology and culture as well.
But to me, I feel like the victims are the ones that came worse off are the women that always said no, because then they wouldn't get the roles, right? So
That's
in a way,
great point.
me, I find them the victims because, that's... I've been hit on by people I've had no interest when I was modelling, like photographers. And I don't think that maybe they were doing it in a sleazy way, maybe they weren't. But there were girls there were definitely women that would put themselves in those positions in order to, get better gigs or get better jobs. So to me, the victims are the girl. By the way, if someone is, I'm just going to say that, is, and if there's no
keep saying that
consent,
word on YouTube.
I'm sorry, leave it. Yeah, I can't say it. I'll go.
I know. Well, we never know. It changes every week what they're going to get us for.
I do think they get you for that. So, obviously, if there's no consent there,
But if you're getting paid regularly, that does sound a bit consent if you're taking the money.
If you're taking the money.
It's complicated. I mean, there was the Neil Gaiman case. Have you seen him? He's the writer. He's written Coraline and some of these books that became kids' books and things like that. I mean, he comes across as a weird guy. He was living out in the middle of New Zealand in the countryside somewhere, and he has this like bath that's in the garden, and he'd show like a babysitter. He'd have like a babysitter over, but not have his kid there. Yeah. And the babysitter would be like, okay, this is a bit odd. And then he'd be like, why don't you have a bath in my bath in the garden? I'll just go away. And then they'd get in the bath, and then he'd come back naked and be like, yeah, I'm going to get in the bath. So that's weird.
That's weird.
But and I think he deserves to be criticised for being weird. I think. But I think it's a long New York Post, I think, article. She was messaging him all the time saying, I want you to know that this is consensual. This is, and I'm sorry that people say it's not. And I know there's all sorts of forces at work here, but it's not as clear cut as, it's just him and.
So, and this is the thing, it's like, it was like the Me Too thing was just like so weird. And it's like you say, it's not clear cut. There's, obviously if a woman's not consenting, she's not consenting. That's a whole other situation. But I'm saying that a lot of these women would consent to get, further on. And then obviously a few years later, if maybe they didn't get the role they thought they would get, if their careers didn't turn out the way they thought they would be, then they kind of get bitter about it. And that's when it all starts. It never really starts like at the time, the day of. It's always kind of when their careers haven't quite gone out as they had hoped, when, things just didn't work out quite as how they thought they would be. That's when it all comes out like that. But, so what I'm saying is I've seen it. I think I feel bad for the women that actually lose out because they say no. Yeah. I find they're more more of a victim than a woman who has said yes. And she's like, right, I'm going to sleep my way into getting this, that, and the other. And that's what I just found the Me Too thing to be. And then when I see that there are literally women who walk through parks who are getting pulled over by people they won't even describe. Oh, we're doing a manhunt. A woman was in the park. We're doing a manhunt. No description. Where's the Me Too movement then? Because there's no question that is there. There's no question at all when someone's getting dragged off a path or walking their dog and something bad happens. There's no, where are the Me Too women for that? Because this is happening a lot all around the country and you don't hear them. You never heard the Me Too women coming out speaking for the victims of the grooming gangs, which, you know, I won't say the word because it's YouTube.
I know, and everyone has a go because they say, why didn't you call them our gangs? And was like, well, I'd love to, but then YouTube's going to kick us off. So what's the, you won't even hear it. And,
exactly.
you know, but that's really, the argument you're making is one I don't think I've actually heard before. And it's really fascinating, which is that the ones who did say no, they didn't get to, when the whole Me Too movement happened, they weren't able to say like, oh, here's my stuff. I mean, they were a little bit, they could say I was also propositioned, but they didn't get that sort of sympathy either. And they didn't have a career to fall back on because of what happened. That is horrific what happened to them. And
also, you know, and I don't think, it's not like, I suppose in a way I probably might fit in that category, but I don't see it as like, you know, there's a lot of victim Olympics that goes on with like the lefty woke kind of agendas like Me Too, BLM, all of that. But, you know, I suppose I would fit in that category, but I never saw myself as like, oh, you know, poor me. Because I was like, well, you know, that's just how it goes. And
were you
know,
propositioned by directors and things?
Not really, but I know that if I had used my lurks or flirted my way in, or maybe just like hung out a bit longer or stayed around after photo shoots or schmoozed a little bit more, like, you know, I could have got further, but I just didn't want to, you know, I didn't want to do any of that. So
I can see, you can see why people would want to, because I know what you're saying. Look, I understood that's the way it is. You can see also why some people would say, hey, I want to change this. This isn't right that somebody who wants to be a model should have to also flirt with the directors.
Yeah. But I just think it's changed so much that it's gone so the other way that like no one, or they almost wouldn't do that, or people would probably now feel really uncomfortable, or women probably, you know, might not do that. And men are even too scared to talk to women, or they don't know if they're going to get Me Too'd, or, you know, you almost have to get like a romance has gone. You almost have to ask somebody, will you kiss her? Can I kiss you? Can you sign this form? It's all gone a little bit like crazy that way for just normal things. And, you know, just joking around and a bit of banter and that kind of stuff. That's all stopped, I think, because of Me Too as well.
You were quite publicly critical of Kirstie Allsopp.
Yeah.
Who you should say for those who don't know who that is and what happened with her.
Kirstie Allsopp came out and she spoke about how...
she's a presenter, isn't it?
Yeah, presenter. I didn't really know who she was. I just saw, honestly...
I'm not entirely sure either. I just know the name.
Yeah, I just saw this name and I'm saying, this woman... Well, what actually happened is I just kept seeing the guy everywhere. He was like on the front page of the newspapers. Gregg Wallace. Yeah. And I was like, why is this guy on everything? So I think he'd said something inappropriate to her like years and years and years ago. And all of a sudden, it was like on the front page of the papers. And I'm like, why are you only bringing it up now, first of all? And also, like, it was a joke. It was banter. People had banter like 20 years ago, 10 years ago. People were able to joke around. And they did it as well with that Italian chef. I'm so bad with names. Gino D'Acampo. Yeah. They've just done it to him. You know, put him on the front pages. And I'm like, hold on a minute. I'm seeing more about, you know, Gino D'Acampo. I'm seeing more about Gregg Wallace than I am of people that have literally had pictures, category A pictures of children. I won't say the thing because it's YouTube, on their phones.
Hugh Edwards are we talking about?
There's Hugh Edwards, but ever since Hugh Edwards, there's been a massive list of them, like just absolutely loads of them. The judge who just let Labour MP Mark Amesbury off with a suspended sentence at appeal, he'd actually just let somebody go on a suspended sentence who had had category A photos. And meanwhile, locked up, a lady called Julia Sweeney for social media posts for over a year and a half. So what you're seeing is Gregg Wallace, Gino Campio,
Campio's fine. Something Italian.
Yeah, you're seeing them on the front pages of the papers for things that they've said, but you're not seeing the most heinous crimes ever being brought up.
Because it's a celebrity, people want that.
And this is how it is.
Humiliated.
They want, that's all it is. They want to see a celebrity humiliated. They don't want to hear and have to face the absolute horrors that are going on in this country and actually be like, oh my God, this is what's happened to a child. A man's got the photographs. He's being set free from jail, but, let's just focus on the celebrity and someone, on a, falling down from
Who
grace.
are these guys with like children on their phone, aside from Hugh Edwards?
Well, it's weird because I don't know. They just seem to be from all over. It's not the same as the grooming gangs. Grooming gangs. People are going to say, why don't you call them?
They know though on this channel.
Yeah. So it's not the same as the grooming. Like the lone kind of work secretly and by themselves are one thing, but then you have the grooming gangs. But that's like a whole network. That's in collusion with people higher up. That's in collusion with the police, with counsellors. You've got your lone ones, and I'm not saying that makes it any better, but I'm talking about that these ones here, those will get caught and the sentences are not enough.
Yeah. Are you saying that the grooming gangs have sort of gone unpunished and certainly overlooked a lot of the time because of the ethnicity and people were concerned about appearing racist? Meanwhile, TV hosts are being kicked off for making silly comments.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Front pages of all the papers. And I mean, look at Russell Brand, just a total and utter witch hunt. No charges, nothing, but a witch hunt and actively going and looking for people from his past, because at that time he was kind of going against the narrative, I think. They were actively trying to dig through his past, calling through thousands of people, finding somebody that would say, one bad thing. But over here, you've got young girls screaming out and getting completely and utterly ignored.
Is there a point at which we can say, look, they shouldn't be ignored, but some of these TV presenters did things that were bad. They might not have been illegal, but maybe there is a case to say, Russ, some of the stories about you sound pretty psychopathic. Gregg Wallace, do you need to be talking about your anus to contestants on the show? And maybe not necessarily cancelling them forever, but saying, guys, come on.
Absolutely. But I think in that moment, you've got to say something. I think, this is the thing. Women's lib is supposed to empower women, right? So for me, if I didn't like how somebody spoke to me, I would speak up for myself. I'd be like, look, don't talk to me. I think that's completely inappropriate. That's disgusting. I wouldn't laugh. I'd have a straight face. I wouldn't egg it on. And I think that's kind of how you have to deal with it.
Would the show then be cancelled? That's what Kirstie Allsopp, I think, said back to you. I think she was saying, well, if I'd done that, all the people working on this show, all the audience who would come in, everything's ruined for these people because I've called out what he did in the moment, and I've ruined everyone's day. And there's a lot of pressure not to do that.
I just think you have to go with but why would you do it like later on? Like do it at the time. Just, why would you do it later? We do have to call out. We have to call out things. Women aren't little wallflowers. We shouldn't be made to feel we can't say how we feel. We shouldn't be able to, we can change our minds. We can say no. We can say, look, this is inappropriate. And I don't know, would they have cancelled everything though? Or would they have just pulled him aside, said, look, Gregg, don't speak. You can't behave like this. You can't do this. You're going to be put on a warning. You can't speak like this. Change your behaviour. Because what happens is if you let somebody get away with it once, they'll think they can keep getting away with it. So you have to nip it in the bud. So if you don't nip it in the bud that time, then I think you're contributing to it happening again.
Yeah.
So if you want to speak up and say something, do it kind of in the moment. don't wait for, 10 years to pass and then say, oh, he's like such a perv. Like,
You know what as well is, I think people not in the industry might not expect this, or maybe they do. I've known several women who are really overtly sexual, and they make the kinds of jokes. And when I was a young whippersnapper, getting into the industry at 27, 28, I end up in these office situations where these sort of older women are making those comments to me in front of other people. It is a bit demeaning and debasing and stuff, but I don't know what my point there is, except to say sometimes some women really give it, and some of those women I have sort of framed themselves as victims a lot of the time. I know quite big named women who have framed themselves as victims after having spoken in front of me or to me and others in that very overtly sexual way.
But that's the thing. There's a lot of hypocrisy around it, and as you said, it's not just men who do it. It is women, and I've seen women be completely and utterly inappropriate.
Yeah. Have you been that way?
No, do you know, my fiance actually says that if I was an object, I'd be in violation of the trading standards.
What does that mean?
Just like, he says, you're just so not like, you're a page 3 girl, people expect you to be like overtly sexual or whatever, and I'm like completely the opposite. I'm just, I'm not at all. Like I'm fun and like jokey, but I'm not like overly flirtatious. I'm not like overly sexual, inappropriate. He calls me a little bit prudy sometimes. And so he says I'd be in violation of the Trade Description Act. But
for young people, what was a page 3 girl?
So on page 3 of the tabloids, there was a girl just in her knickers, basically, topless, grinning, quite natural. And that was basically it. So I guess it wasn't as far as Playboy. Like Americans would know Playboy, but the women were always like fully naked in Playboy. Page 3 was just, a topless girl on page 3 of a tabloid.
Was it just the Sun and maybe News of the World, or was it just the Sun?
Star.
Oh.
And then there was a Sport, but that doesn't really count as a paper.
The Sport. Is that still going, the Daily Sport?
I have no idea. I don't even know if the Star's going.
I don't know either.
No.
That's interesting. And don't forget News in Briefs.
I don't know that one.
Maybe that wasn't when you were there. The Sun, it would have... Because I used to work at the Sun. It was my first job.
Okay.
And I was 21. I hated the job, but I was working nights. And one of my jobs was I was the last person... at like 4 or 5 a.m, I had to prepare the page 3 girl.
Oh, did you?
And you know what? When were you doing it? How old were you?
It was about 2000. So I would have been in my
I was 11.
Yeah, I'd have been 20s. I'm 45 now, so I would have been like,
Okay, so it wasn't you, but I was responsible for making sure the iPad version works, because they had to work 3D and you would twist them around with your finger.
Really?
Yeah.
I was living in America at that time, so I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah, it got very futuristic, but often didn't work. So I would find myself at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m, like waiting for the next, like the Sun people to come in the morning, thinking this has to be ready. And I was on tech support, like talking to like Ukraine and India and places about, can you sort out the page 3 girl? You can't twist her around. There's a problem. That's someone's job. That was my job.
I missed that. I wasn't part of that technology.
So that was a 3D page 3 Sun, and it had news in briefs being a pun on news in brief, and briefs being boxers, another word for, or like naked or whatever. And it would be an opinion about the politics of the day.
That was so funny.
Yeah.
Because they did
you have that?
Do you know, I think later on they made a little quote up, but they would always make, I think it was in jest, because the girls never said it, did they? It was,
I doubt it.
No, someone had made
wondered.
it up. No. But they would have a little quote, and I think it was a bit of a piss take, really.
I think Tony Blair is a real hottie.
I think they completely it was just like making fun of everything and just being like tongue in cheek and silly. So, yeah.
Were you proud sort of opening and would you get the paper the next day?
I definitely would. I would always get the paper because I would want to see who was on page 3 and who my competition
And when it was you, I mean, would you get your own ones?
Yeah, I did actually. I got my own, and I'd be like, "Oh, how do I look? How are my nails? Did I?" But it's a weird thing because it was a very, very fun time in my life, I look back and I only have like good memories of it. There were no bad memories of like my page 3 days. At the time, I was doing like a lot of stuff, like being a grid girl. I was a grid girl for the car races and all of that kind of stuff. And then obviously you had a lot of women that were very against it. The feminists, they were very much like, this is just degrading. This is awful. We shouldn't have this. Let's ban page 3. And I don't know when it happened, when it got banned eventually, but I was living in America at the time and I hadn't even realized it had gone, or I hadn't actually realized that whole thing was happening because I was so far, out the loop by that time. But what's weird is you don't have those mums, they were like mums and feminists. You don't have them doing that with the horrific amount of graphic porn. I don't know if I can say that word.
I don't know either. We'll see if it works.
Yeah. I'll just mouth there. That you have on free platforms like Twitter. You even have it on Twitter. And I'm a big fan of X, but I don't think you should be having that on any platform where it's, under 18. Like boobs, I feel like boobs are like one thing, because you look at a painting and you see boobs. You look at old statues, there's boobs. It's just like, I don't see boobs as thing, but like when it comes to actual porn.
I had to spell that for a second.
Yeah.
It's that Twitter stuff and Instagram as well. That's really annoying for men. And I saw there's a comedian I like called Ryan. Oh, bollocks. Hang on. I don't want to get his name wrong. I'm pretty sure it's Ryan Long, and he's Canadian. He's very fun. I find him hysterical. And I just don't want to make sure I got it right. Yes, he does a bit about that. And it's because it is just a man's brain, and probably a woman's as well. When you're scrolling down, you linger for half a second longer, and you sort of take in what it is, and then you scroll down. But then it takes it as like, oh, you liked that, we're going to give you more and more and more.
Yes,
and suddenly your Instagram is full of all that, and then your wife's looking over your shoulder. And I promise I wasn't looking at any. I'm not speaking about myself. I'm speaking about men in general.
Yeah.
That's how they get you with all of that stuff. But it must be weird for you to see that what you used to do has been sort of, and I do understand that argument as well, because it is different. Like, well, this is the news. Why are you putting women boobs? It's degrading. I get the argument, and I get yours as well. But to move from that and getting rid of that and going to MeToo, bringing in lots of people who hate women, as we say, letting men go into the women's bathroom, and now sort of celebrating the OnlyFans girls. There's the phenomenon of Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue in particular. Yeah. What are your thoughts on them?
Repulsive. I wasn't going to say that. Repulsive. I think it's absolutely horrific. I think as a platform, I'll say as a platform, OnlyFans, I think it started, and you would have things like chefs on there. I know that a lot of people during lockdown that were speaking out about lockdown who got thrown off Instagrams went on for subscriptions on OnlyFans, but not for, what the OnlyFans is used for now, but to talk about things as, just like conversations and things that they would normally put on their Instagram. Then I think it just turned into this horrific, like, porn site. But when those two women you mentioned, the funny thing about it is I wouldn't know their names if it wasn't for the fact that they've been in the mainstream. They've been on things, breakfast TV. Mm-hmm. They've been spoken about online, and then like you see them being talked about on podcasts or being even worse, interviewed on podcasts. And it's like, I still believe that pretty much there's no such thing as bad publicity. So even if these people are getting battered, it's still like click, click, click. People are going to be like, oh, who are these women? Let's go on and have a look. Now, if it's on their OnlyFans and it was kept to their OnlyFans, like, as I find it repulsive. I find it
100 men or 1,000 men in a day.
And then you see some, and then I've seen some of it, and I think, is this like partly a psyop? The things that they're doing, like, and the kind of the appearance of the men there, there were very few white men, is what I'm saying. From what I saw, and then you have like, little vulnerable girls. These women look quite young, little blonde-haired, blue-eyed women. Then you have like these grooming gangs, and it's all kind of at the same time.
It's something that's forgotten, isn't it? The grooming gangs, a big part of it was the sort of dominance over young cherubic young white girls. Yeah.
So I'm like, is this like a psyop? Like, what are they pushing here? This is disgusting. Why are they now on, mainstream breakfast channels or daytime talk shows.
Well, because it's such a fascinating topic. I mean, look how passionate you are talking about it, and me as well. That's why, and people want to have these national conversations, I suppose. I mean, I wouldn't be against having them on to discuss this stuff. I mean, and I get your point as well. It's platforming degeneracy, I suppose.
And that's the problem, because there is, and it's hard because it's intriguing, as you say. So people are intrigued. Like, I would never click onto their pages and go and see what's happened, but I've seen stills of like the guys, and then they've got this thing, the backdoor challenge. It's like, it's so repulsive.
I don't want to know what that is.
No, exactly. and that came out after literally after a judge had, I think Elon Musk tweeted it. That's how it got around. A judge.
They must have liked that.
Yeah, the judge had. It was an old, what's it called? It's when the sentencing report, or I don't know the actual term for it. It's when the judge makes his statement at the end, sentencing statement or something like that. And it explained the absolute depravity of what went on. And then you have these women, it's just trying to do something like in that realm.
Do you mean Musk shared something that was about like the grooming gangs and
about
the depravity?
The grooming gangs
I see.
And the depravity and the sentencing
and then we're
statement from the judge. And then we're seeing those doing
like a mock
something.
Version of it.
Yeah, and it's like, so it's really repulsive to me. But, like I said, if they kept it on their OnlyFans and, their kind of depraved people found it, that would be one thing. But for, things to then get leaked out onto Twitter.
Is it legal as well? Because isn't that prostitution? Isn't prostitution illegal?
Well, I don't think they're getting paid.
Oh, but they're not getting paid.
They're getting paid but from the man.
So then it's just do you want to do this? Let's do it. And they get loads of money. They would say, look, I get what you're saying here, but this is capitalism. And I've made a fortune. I don't know how. Nobody knows what they've made. But
they make a fortune.
It could be millions.
So I mean, but that just shows like the depravity of people. But you know what? Keep it to the over 18 show ID, have to put a credit card in. Like, I find it like, no matter what it is, I find it like absolutely physically repulsive. And actually looking at one of the pictures kind of made me feel sick when I saw it, and like actually anxious. Like
the cameraman sort of gagged because the guys, this was they were doing a recording. It was Josh Peters, I think. He's, they're not directors of that. They make like different kinds of videos. They're not used to being in that environment. The guys had to walk in with these cameras filming Josh's documentary about her, and you could hear him gagging because of the smell in the room.
I can't even imagine, honestly. But just a still made me like, I just felt really anxious. It's almost like a torture scene. I just can't think of anything absolute worse. But the problem is I feel that young people are very influenced by media, what they see on TV. They hear about money, and they'll be looking at that and going, well, this girl's got famous and she's got all this money from it, and she's explaining it in this and that a way. And then they'll take that. And I do think even if it's platforming something bad, they will still go into the minds of a young, easily influenced person.
Something to aspire to.
Have
you sort of called them out publicly? Because I imagine they would think of you perhaps like you might have thought of the feminists who were calling to get rid of page 3.
I mean, I've probably been called a hypocrite loads of times. I have called them out, and then people are like, well, you did this, really. I'm like, you showed your boobs for a living. I'm like, okay, I showed my boobs, but I would not ever be having sex on camera. I can tell you that now, nor showing anything downstairs. Like,
Did you never do that?
No, I mean, there were those magazines available if somebody wanted to do that, but most of the page 3 girls, didn't do anything like that.
Well, if they'd offered a big bit of money, would you have done that? Or was that like a policy? That's put on.
No,
that's
to me, it's like, okay, I would probably sunbathe on a beach at that time. I wouldn't feel safe doing that in this country anymore. I wouldn't feel like I could do that. That was 25 years ago. It was different, different times. It just wouldn't be safe. As I said, down Bournemouth Beach, women getting molested and stuff. But to me, at that time, I would have sunbathed topless on a beach. So, to me, it was just boobs. And I didn't see it as anything like overtly sexual or anything like that. I was like, yeah, there's plenty of statues of women and there's artworks of women topless with things wrapped around them. Would never have ever considered doing anything further or more. Never.
I wonder to what extent boobs are found more attractive by men because they're hidden. Because they're just sort of like what we have, but without hair and sort of pushed out. And I wonder, like, okay, for those sort of tribes, and I know people will say, because there was that Ricky Gervais in The Office, he was saying, like, the character said he'd read that we like them because it reminds us of the bottom and sort of going from behind. It was this really awkward date he was on. He was explaining that. I don't know if that's true. I'm sure there were all sorts of evolutionary theories about it. But like, I imagine like the tribes and stuff in Africa, where they just go around with the boobs out. To what extent are the men sat there like, oh my God? Or is it just like, well, they're always out, they're sort of dangling around anyway?
That's what I would think. I think the more they're hidden, the more it becomes like, which is almost like, but it's a circular thing, like when...
Ankles in the Victorian age.
Well, women now and the way they treat British women, like some cultures will treat British women because they aren't fully covered, with their heads covered from all the way to, like ankles now and, heads and wrists covered. And
that's a really good point. Yeah, that's really worrying. That's worrying because we are importing people who are used to having covered up women everywhere, and suddenly they're like, oh my, that's like seeing a face must be like seeing boobs or something for...
Well, that's what I'm thinking. If you're so used to seeing people covered up, and that's their excuse, isn't it? That Western women all dress like sluts. So, if you have a little dress on and you've got a little bit of cleavage showing, well, you must be up for it, right?
I love my wife and find her very physically attractive. Ankles, take them or leave them. I've not looked, and she doesn't try and sort of get me in, and go like, look at these ankles. Doesn't do it. Victorians would have been going bonkers, and perhaps people from those kinds of religions as well would be loving those kinds of ankles.
And I do think that's a huge part of it. I do think that's a massive part of it. Like it's almost more forbidden, I suppose, in a way. Like you said, I don't, but I think also there's something about it. I think it's just biological, where I think it's just a woman with good, like, or bigger boobs shows that they can nurture and breastfeed their children. So there is something biological to it. But I think when you kind of make it a little bit taboo and start, covering this up, covering that up, it all becomes a bit more like, when they, finally get seen.
I think so. I've got another question for you, but first, where can people find you, follow you, those kinds of things?
So I'm on Twitter mainly, or X, Leilani Dowding. Got thrown off Instagram very early on, 2021. So I can't use my full name on there, but I'm on there as Leilani Dowd. And on there, you basically just see me at home around working with the horses and the little small holding I have and chickens. And
that's a lovely life.
Very nice life. So it's like...
The last remaining dregs of Englishness still there. Go and follow for that.
Well, that's a sad thing about it. I've kind of like run away into the countryside. I've come back from America, run into this countryside, and then I feel like it's getting encroached on and taken over by just like, building on all the fields, putting solar farms out everywhere. And you cannot, you can't escape it. Where's there to run anymore?
Texas. You've got to go to Texas. It's the only place with space now. Oh, God.
I know. So I did actually wonder if I was to go back to America, because I am an American citizen, where would I go? California's got the fires, and I actually left California because of the fires and my horses. Oh. Florida has the hurricanes. Like, where would you go? So
Texas.
Yeah,
someone will reply
Montana.
With a reason. Montana. There's loads of places, isn't there? Who's a heretic you admire?
I think Mark Stein. Actually, I know Mark Stein is the heretic. Number one, I think, he was on GB News. He was speaking out first about grooming gangs, about vaccine injury, speaking about all of this. He just got done by Ofcom. It was a pylon. It was an orchestrated pylon where people were mass reporting him to Ofcom in a not an organic way, an orchestrated way. And he stood his ground and he was like, if I'm going to stay here, I want to be able to speak about what I want to speak about. And they wouldn't let him. So when he left GB News, I kind of followed off with him.
Oh, Mark Stein. Do you not appear on GB News anymore?
No, I've stopped. When Dan Wootton was when they finally got rid of Dan Wootton, I was like, I'm done now. Dan was probably, I think, the first person that got me on GB News.
I see.
Then I went on with Nigel Farage, Talking Pints, and I think that's when Mark Stein saw me. Then he got me on there once a week talking about stuff, which is like
all the stuff.
Which is mad because I'm like, this is almost like news in briefs, isn't it? I was like,
it's gone full circle.
Why am I here talking about these like political things? But actually, I was never there to talk about politics. What happened was I think that very social aspects of everything became political. Everything became politicized, and it was like left or right, or left or right.
Yeah.
And, where I thought I was kind of in the center and I'd always been center, suddenly, I had all these people calling me like
right-wing.
Far right, far right. And it's like, hold on a minute. I've always been, in the middle. I think I would have considered myself a bit of a leftist when I lived in Los Angeles. Like, I don't eat animals. I care about the environment, not the net zero bullshit.
Sure.
But,
you sound like me.
Yeah.
I don't eat animals either.
Do you not?
No. And a lot of the things, I'm on the lefty side, I suppose. But some of that's mental.
But the whole spectrum moved.
Yeah.
That's the problem, isn't it? Everything moved. And it's like I came back and suddenly you had BLM burning Los Angeles down.
Mm-hmm.
And, my little nail salon where I think they were Vietnamese, that was all trashed and burnt down. The Argentinian restaurant burnt down. Everything was just looted. And this was like, again, this was like Melrose. This was like when I was living in Los Angeles, I was able to go out at night, walk back from a pub or a comedy store to my place. Now, Melrose, you get shot on the street at lunchtime if you don't hand over your phone or your thing. So it's, so it's
ridiculous.
it's all gone mad. But I think people would have said I was left, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you're so right.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well, I think you are so right.
right wing.
Yeah, well, not that. Well, yes. People, please go follow Leilani Dowding. We'll put some links down below. Her Twitter, for some reason, doesn't have caps locks on the first or last name, does it? You're one of those.
Oh, I didn't even know you could put cap locks on. I had no idea.
It's just like an all lowercase thing. Go and follow her. She's been wonderful. She's come all this way for this, and she's really on the ball with this stuff. So go follow and see a slice of English stuff on her Instagram as well. Hit that like button and keep watching this channel.